Welcome to the All About You podcast. My name is Sheila and I am your host. In this podcast, I invite people to tell their stories of their travels, hobbies and passions. These podcasts are also now available on my All About You YouTube channel. So if you have a story to tell, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story. Welcome to the All About You podcast, and today my guest is another podcaster, and I'm very happy to welcome Christine to the podcast. Christine, I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you. You have a podcast called Flourish in the Foreign, which focuses on Black women living and thriving abroad. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Before we start talking about your podcast, let's talk about your own journey. So you're from the US, now living in Valencia. So I guess there is a story there.
Definitely. I'm from Atlanta, and 5 years ago, I decided to move to Spain. I was just quite burnt out. I had gone to law school and done all those things. I joined a startup. I had started my own business, and I was severely burnt out without actually having the language at all for burnout. I was anxious. I was clearly depressed. I had the racing thoughts. I didn't have not even motivation. I was just exhausted all the time. And I think because of toxic grind culture in the US, I didn't even consider that I was suffering from something like mental wellness, like not being in balance. I just thought I was being a punk. I thought I was being kind of like a loser. And I had always wanted to live abroad since I was 17. And a couple of years before I decided to move to Spain in 2014, I had walked the Camino de Santiago. And something kind of all came together in 2017 where I just was like, I'm tired and I just don't want to be. And so I decided to take a sabbatical and join the Auxiliar de Conversación program here in Spain. And I moved to La Rioja. And it was only supposed to be for a year, maybe 2, and now it's 5, and I'm never going back. And then after I moved to La Rioja, I moved to Barcelona, and I lived there for 3.5 years. And then I moved here to Valencia last year. Been here for a year, really, really enjoy it. So far, it's my favorite place to live in Spain. That's how I got here.
Excellent. Good to see that you're enjoying your time in Valencia and you feel settled.
Yeah.
Christine, let's talk about your podcast, Flourish in the Foreign. What is your podcast about? What is your goal?
Yeah, so Flourish in the Foreign is all about celebrating, elevating, and just affirming the voices and stories of Black women across the diaspora who are living and thriving abroad while exploring living abroad as a pathway to wellness. I started the podcast in the midst of the pandemic in 2020 because I'm still type A and I'm very much a Capricorn, even though I live in Spain. So when the lockdowns happened here in Spain, I was like, I need a project. I need something to do. And so I started Flourish in the Foreign because I had been traveling for many years. I'd been living in Spain. And I just didn't feel like the voices and the stories of Black women who were living abroad were really showcased in any capacity. I know that from my personal experience because, as I told you before, I've been wanting to live abroad since I was 17. I've been researching it. I've been looking at it. I've been reading books. And I just didn't see people that looked like me doing it at all. And I feel like if I had seen or I heard these stories of Black women, I would have gone abroad sooner, maybe in a different way, maybe in a different country. And then actually right before I started the podcast, it's something I had been thinking about. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I actually went to a startup event in Barcelona because I'd worked in startups before. I wanted to see the scene. And I remember having a conversation with this white Australian man who was like, what are you doing here? And I was like, well, I'm checking out the scene. He's like, yeah, but what are you doing in Spain? I was like, just living. And he just seemed really befuddled. He was like, you're American, you're this Black girl. What are you doing? And I thought it was interesting because, me being an American and him being Australian, equally hard for us to immigrate to the EU. I just thought, I think there is a disconnect. Obviously, mainstream is not going to showcase these voices and stories because they don't think that we exist, right? They don't think that we're out here living and just being abroad. And so I wanted to showcase that, not necessarily for a mainstream audience, but really just for the validation, the affirmation that we are out here doing it. But also I think it's important because what happens a lot when like mainstream media wants to get diverse is that they take on their own like prejudices and their own kind of thinking and biases towards people who are not mainstream, whether it be diverse, ethnicity, religion, what have you, identity, sexual orientation. They take their own view and put it on them. And I wanted to give the mic to the Black women who are living abroad. I wanted them to tell their own stories, which is why if you listen to the podcast, it is done in personal narrative. So it's very little me. It is them, it is the guests telling their stories, working it out in their mind, coming to some like conclusions and revelations while speaking to me. And that's really important because I think that when you think about history and things like that, we're looking at someone else's retelling of what happened in a time period. And I want to have something that is somewhat of an anecdotal, like repository that showcases in this time period these Black women's stories, which are so different. They share some similarities, but not in what maybe people would think are the similarities. I wanted to showcase what living life was like in this time period for these women who decided to leave their home countries and live abroad and who are enjoying it and who are thriving, and tell everyone the reasons why they decide to do it, because it's not the same either too, right? So it was important for me to do that. And since I've launched it in May 2020, the podcast has taken a life of its own, from passion project to now really becoming a platform, being a space, I think not only in the expat podcasting space, travels, space, Black space, but something that's really unique and interesting. And I'm proud of that. And I get people who email me and DM me almost every week who say like, I just discovered your podcast and I binged it. And I'm like, I have over 70 episodes now. They're all an hour long. So if someone's binging the podcast, thank you very much. It's amazing. But I mean, it's been profoundly healing and affirming for me to do it. And I'm just so happy to bring this to the world, honestly, because it brings me so much joy. So I'm happy that it brings other people joy.
Podcasts are quite similar, as in we are both telling other people's stories. Your podcast is not necessarily about you, it's the stories of the people you're having conversations with, and the same with me. But I think the interesting thing is you have created the platform with your website, with your podcast, because that was not available when you were making the transition to travelling and moving. It wasn't there, so you thought there is nothing here for Black women who want to do what I want to do. It's not that someone's got to do it, I might as well do it. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's basically my personality, though. I say I'm very impatient, right? So I will look things up. I'm a researcher at heart. I think that's probably why me in law school, even that was a thing that I did. I'm a researcher at heart. I'm a self-helper. I will figure it out. But I think it comes to a point where you're just, these things don't exist and I want them to, and I can wait for someone to create it, or I can give it my best shot. And for me, it's never like, I'm going to create it and it's going to be magical. And whatever I create, it's mostly me saying, I'm going to create it and hopefully someone who's better than me will take it and run with it and take it to where it needs to be. Because when I started my podcast, I knew nothing about podcasting really. Nothing about production. I listened to podcasts, but I had no idea the work that comes into producing a podcast as an indie, as a solo. It's a lot of work, but I wanted to create it because I knew that there was a space for it. There was a need for this. And that has been transformative as well. I think it's one of those things that once you start creating things You're like, oh, I could create that. It may not be amazing, right? It may not be something that you take a picture of and put on Pinterest and be like, oh yeah, everyone, do this like I did it. It's not always pretty, but I'm happy that I've done it because it's changed me as a person about what I think I can do and how I go about life, being a real problem solver. And even if it's not pretty, I sometimes get the job done.
What's one of the things that you have discovered about podcasting that you never thought in a million years would be a thing, would happen, or just something you've gone, oh my God, I didn't expect this to happen with the podcast?
I think I have become a better listener from the podcast, which I think is obvious, but I think I've developed some kind of like auditory psychological theories, because when I'm editing my podcast, depending on the person and their vocal tick, right? They say like a lot, like I say, or or whatever it is, or or they do like double speak. I have definitely just come up with some theories as to why people do that now, and I would never have had that kind of interest without podcasting, because you're editing, you're listening to it, and it's different from conversation, right? I think in conversation we naturally kind of like do self-editing, but when you're listening back, your ear gets tired. You have to edit it to make it tighter for the audience. And so now I have developed theories about people.
Come on, let's spill these theories.
For my guests that are American, the tics are going to be like. We say like a lot. It's a filler word. I don't know why. It just is. But I've noticed that with all of my guests, kind of across the board, regardless of where they're from, if they're engaging in double speak, meaning they'll say something and they'll say it over and over again, or they'll re-say it again in different ways, I think that is a tell of someone who is, one, nervous, okay, but people who are not accustomed to speaking in public, in my opinion, because I have guests that have maybe never been on a podcast before, but they just nail it. And I think it's because they have that public speaking kind of experience. I also feel like it's really interesting to hear the words people use when they're thinking about telling you something and they're not sure if they're going to tell it to you. Because for me in my podcast, I tell everyone, if you say something and you say, actually, I don't want you to include it, you could tell me that. But I do ask some probing questions, usually around dating and like those kind of intimate relationships that people, they start either kind of double speaking, or you could hear that like thinking is going on in their brain while they're speaking. They're trying to self-edit, and that's always fascinating to hear.
Going back to the podcasting with your guests, when your guests are listening to your podcast, I guess a majority are thinking about moving to another country and they're using it as a resource?
No, I mean, all of my guests have lived abroad, and they've all lived abroad for at least 3 years consecutively. But many of them have lived abroad for many, many years in many different countries. Now, my audience, I would say, is a mixture of people who are aspiring to go abroad, people who are already abroad, and then some people who are repats who've returned to their home country. So that, I would say that. But I don't have anyone on the show who hasn't been abroad for at least 3 years. Because I think, as you know, the first year is exciting. Even if it's like bad exciting, it's exciting. There's a lot of things happening. You don't really know yourself or really know the place until about year 2, year 3, how you really feel, if the place is really a good fit for you too. Until you really get into a solid routine, you acquire language skills, things like that.
Majority of the guests on your podcast are from the US?
I think currently the majority is from the US, though in the next season I'm going to actually feature a lot more women from around the world. But right now I think the majority of the women are from the US and the UK, and then I have several women who are from other parts of the world as well.
And is there one particular thing that your guests say, this was the worst thing about moving to another country?
No, that's the thing. I think what's interesting is that I would assume as Black women, we may have shared experiences. We could say discrimination, racism, or stereotypes. And that's actually not true, which is interesting. So there's not been a uniformed worst thing about living abroad. And that's what I think is so fascinating, right? Because for some of my guests, the hardest thing about living abroad is the lack of support from family and friends. People who are like, don't do it. What are you doing? You have a good job. Or some people, I've had guests who said they didn't tell their family until they were in the airport and they had checked in. And they're like, yeah, hi, I'm not going to be able to, speak with you for the next 24 hours because I'm traveling because I've moved abroad. I've also had guests who would say, like, maybe the worst thing about being abroad is the fact that they didn't do it sooner. I actually hear a lot of people like that because they feel that they would have just had a different life, maybe met their partner sooner, had kids, maybe not have pursued their career ambitions as hard as they did. So there isn't anything, I think, uniform about the worst thing. And I think that's really interesting because I think it's a testament to where they're from, but also who these women are individually and what they value. And I think that's something that you get from living abroad. You really understand the things that you need as an individual. You really understand your own values when you're taken outside of your societal context. What everyone says that you should aspire to. You should have this, and you should have that, and don't you have this, and don't you have that? And when you're outside of that, you get to really understand what it is that you need as a person. And that's a great thing about being a foreigner is that you rarely have people questioning those things. They rarely question your identity as a person. They really question your values and what you want to do and how you want to spend your time because they're kind of like, well, you're a foreigner and that's strange, or we don't understand because you're a foreigner. So you have a nice juicy space of being outside of your societal context and also not fully in your current country's society, that you get to decide what you want and who you are and how you want to be. And in general, people just go with it. And it's really interesting. All the women are so different. And it's always surprising every time I interview.
I think one of the things, when you move abroad, you become a different person, you become a different you. For example, we've got the challenge of the language. That's probably the number one thing. And I think just generally how Spain works in respect of day-to-day living, documentation, getting things done. And I really do believe you become a different person. And I actually do like the thought that, yes, I do live in a different country to the country of my birth. I think the experiences I've had over the years, yes, some of them have been frustrating, some absolutely phenomenal, and hopefully there will be some more phenomenal ones in the future. But you do have to be a different person. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think what's interesting is that living abroad, I think, is the catalyst for evolution, if done so intentionally, if you're actually open to that experience. Because as you said, there's going to be frustrations. Anytime I have to deal with the foreigner's office, I just have to really meditate that day and just say, it is going to be what it's going to be, and bring my huge folder of documents, multiple copies, and just be like, it is going to be what it's going to be. I have an appointment. That means nothing. I don't know when they're going to see me. You just have to recognize that. But you've been in surrendering to the experience. And what I mean by surrendering, we probably both know, you go into the Facebook forums and people just complain and complain and complain and say, why not this and why not that? And look, I complain too, right? But I know I live in Spain. And I just have to accept that. You have to surrender to it. But I think the people who are so resistant to a place being itself are the people who will not ever evolve. You're expecting Atlanta or London in Valencia is insanity. And it's the biggest way to disappoint yourself. And it's also a way to really rob yourself of a really rich experience of getting to know who you are in this situation. Now, look, I've had plenty of guests who've moved to different countries and have been like, this is not for me. And that's great. that's great for you to understand that. But I think you can't even understand that aspect of yourself, what's for you and what's not for you, if you don't kind of receive it all. Like, what is this country about? What is this place about? And what about it is not for me? So that I can understand as I move to the next place what's actually for me. But that takes self-awareness. And if you're not going to be present in this foreign country, let alone your home country, growth will never happen. You will never become a new person or become the person you always desired to become, or the person who has always been deep down that you don't even know about, which I think is really exciting when you're like, I didn't even know I like this and I like that. But you won't know that unless you're actually present to it. And I think that is something that's so wondrous about living abroad with intention, with a heart that's open. And not everyone who moves abroad does that. And I think they rob themselves so much. Just being angry all the time, being so resistant to a place.
I think you learn so much about yourself when you live in another country.
Yeah.
You have to adjust your behaviour. As you said, in the States, in the UK, we were much, come on, faster. That does not work here.
No.
Faster just does not, they probably don't even have a word for that. It does not work here. So if you are coming here and that's what you're expecting, you're going to fall flat on your face so many times, you're going to hate it. And it takes time for you to say, okay, it's not going to work faster. Okay, I've got to slow down. I've got to appreciate the time scale of things, the time of day, the season of the year. We're in August at the moment. Basically, the city is shut. But we know that. We've been here long enough to say, okay, don't plan on doing anything major, getting anything done in August. It's really not going to happen. Once the kids go back to school, everything will kick back into gear. But it takes time and it takes patience, and you have to adjust to accept that. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that is the magic and the curse of living abroad. It's the magic, again, if you're intentional. It's the curse if you're not. Is that you're moving abroad for a specific reason, to have a different experience, whether it be professionally or maybe it's just personally. And you have to actually be open to that experience for you to learn anything. And I think, being able to adapt is key. Because like I said, if you're expecting London and Valencia, if you're expecting London in any part of Spain, come on, no. Like, what are you doing? I think that to enjoy a place and to get the full benefits of living in a new country is to actually say to yourself, who must I become to really enjoy living here? And I think that's helpful, because that might also illuminate a place that's not for you. If you're like, well, for me to really enjoy this place, I'd have to become X, Y, and Z, and that's not really interesting to me. But, I think that's the thing, is that you have to ask yourself, who must I become? And just go with it. I still have frustrations. Like, I'm sad. I'm sad that my favorite little shop is closed. It's been closed all of August, of course. They're so sweet and they deserve the vacation. But, I run out of something and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to Mercadona. I want to go to this shop. But also, I think they are so lovely. They deserve a vacation. And they also teach me to eventually take a vacation one of these days. Hopefully in October, to enjoy life and to build that into my schedule.
Well, thank you for giving me the title of the podcast, because we've got, who do I need to become to enjoy living here? Isn't it? That is what you have to do.
I think so.
You have to become another person.
It makes you realize that you have to be accountable to yourself and for your life, and that to have the experiences that you see on Instagram or wherever, on TV, it takes work. And I know that work is a bad word, especially UK and the US, it's a very exploitative word. So you're like, oh, work, I don't want to do that. But it's something that we must get interested in the cultivation of our own lives. And so when we think about who must I become, recognize that Up until this point, you have worked, you have cultivated your identity by the choices that you've made. And so if you're not happy with those choices, which is fine, it's part of life, know that the same energy that you have invested in doing things maybe because your parents told you so or whoever said this was a good idea will be similar to the energy that you need to put into cultivating a life that is in alignment with who you are, the person that you want to become. The difference should be, though, is that you should be much happier in that cultivation. So maybe it was like such hard work and really backbreaking and you had to conform. This should be like, playing in your garden, the garden of your life, where yes, you pull weeds and yes, you have to till the soil, but you're excited about the harvest that you'll reap. So it feels completely different.
Where do you find your guests for your podcast?
Oh, initially, I was just stalking people on the internet. I would see someone like on YouTube. I don't even know how. Honestly, I feel like the universe really aligned a lot of things because some of the people I found had like 30 subscribers on YouTube, and I just found them and I watched their videos. I was like, oh yeah, I want this person and this person and this person. So initially I just was stalking people for months and be like, okay, yeah. And then I sent them a pitch and I got an amazing response. And then from there, it's been through word of mouth. People pitch me all the time now, or they say you should interview my friend. And sometimes, I see people being featured in magazines or, maybe newspaper articles that are, I think, really interesting, and I'll reach out to them. Majority people pitch me, and that's lovely because I don't have to do the work, but sometimes I still like to go out and try to find people that haven't been, who haven't done the podcast circuit also. That's another thing, right? Because even though I think that my podcast gets a different side of the story, I do like to get people who aren't, not necessarily not promoting something, but people who are a little bit surprised that I would want to ask them to be on the show. People who are like, me? Do I have a story? It's like, ma'am, you've been living in Japan for 20 years. Yeah, you have a story. You have a story, and I want to hear it. I want you to be on my podcast. So I'm always keeping my eyes open to just different people, different experiences. I ask people a lot, and people usually just tell me. Every time I go somewhere, someone's like, you should have your podcast, my boyfriend's sister, because da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, sure, so I'm really lucky in that respect.
So what are the plans for your podcast and Flourish in the Foreign for the next, we're coming up to the last half of the year? And
so for the podcast, I'm going to finish out season 2, and then I think I'm going to start recording season 3 in October, November. I'm launching several new products for Flourish in the Foreign because it's evolved. It's not just a podcast, it's become a resource. And so I'm really building out that website. So I have Moving Abroad with Intention course, and I also have a Moving Abroad with Intention guide. The guide is more of like a journal prompt. It's over 40 pages of journal prompts for people to start their move abroad journey, really getting clear and confident about who they are now and who they want to be in this next chapter of their life. Because moving abroad is a hassle. I don't know, unless you are just wildly wealthy, probably, it's a hassle to move abroad. And so you want to do so with intention. So I have those, but also by trade, I'm a business strategist. And so I've had my own business for many, many years now, and people have always asked me, Christine, how do you support yourself abroad? Do you have a husband? I'm like, oh, if only. I'd love to have a rich husband, but no, not yet. I've developed a group coaching program called Build a Business Abroad because that's what I do. I'm a business strategist. I primarily work with women who are authors, who are basically, they're already speakers. They're basically like 6-figure speakers, things like that. And they're going into national coverage, international coverage. So that's my bread and butter. So I wanted to bring kind of those components down to people who are starting a business, who are trying to scale a side hustle so that they could understand all the moving parts of building a business, but also when you have a business abroad. So I have that as well. And I also have a couple other products that I'm hoping to launch this year, hopefully before Black Friday and all those things. So this year is kind of just trying to get the website really robust, hopefully getting all my transcripts uploaded. That's been a chore. And launching more products so that next year, in my mind, Flourish and Foreign is not just a podcast. It is a platform, but also it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle of intentionality. It's a lifestyle of wellness, but not just bubble baths and crystals, which I love. I love them. But wellness really is about your entire life. I think we do ourselves a disservice by thinking, I need to just treat myself, get my nails done and do that. Yes, of course, take care of yourself. But we do ourselves a disservice if we don't also look to our financial wellness. And what does that mean for us individually? Not like, oh, I need to have this and that. What do I need? What do I need to feel secure, not to feel anxious, to feel as if like I'm taking care of myself in this moment, but also my future self? Professional wellness. How can I share my gifts and my expertise and my education in a manner that feels fulfilling, that feels like I am, giving back in a substantial way? How can I attend to my physical wellness? Not meaning I need a six-pack abs or whatever, but how can I make sure that I feel like strong and healed and complete within my physical body? Mental wellness. How can I make sure that I'm attending to these thoughts or feelings that may not be the best for me? How can I get that into balance? That's what it's really all about. It's about looking at it from a global perspective as you live abroad, because, living abroad isn't the magic pill for everything. It doesn't solve everything that's wrong with your life. I know that people on Instagram and other platforms like to do that because they're marketing to you. They're trying to sell you whatever they're selling. But it isn't. It doesn't work like that. It's a continuous evolution. It's a continuous cultivation. And so if you think of it as I'm moving abroad for my wellness. And so it needs to make sense for all aspects of my wellness, right? It can't just be, well, I live on the beach and I'm drinking coconut water from a fresh coconut, and so everything is good. Well, that's good for a time. That's also vacation, right? We have to think about our professional wellness, our financial, our mental, our physical wellness, because that's the way that we will actually have that contentment that I think people are looking for when they move abroad. But also, it's a way for you to actually have an experience longevity abroad, right? And to be sustainable in that way. If you ever decide to move home, who cares? That's a choice that you've made. But I think a lot of people are afraid to fail abroad. And I think they're afraid to fail abroad and go home with their tail between their legs because they're not thinking of it as a holistic wellness and a holistic wellness point of view. If you think of it like that, then you're moving in a different kind of way. You're behaving a different kind of way. You prioritize different things. And so if you ever go home, it's just a choice that you've made for your wellness, not anything else.
It's so refreshing, Christine, when you're talking about self-care and wellness, because if I see another photograph of somebody sitting on a sofa with a fluffy blanket and a hot cup of tea, I will scream. Yes, we all like to do that. But that is such a tiny aspect. And I guess if you want to capture what does self-care and wellness mean, it probably does mean a hot cup of tea and a fluffy blanket. But let's think outside the box on that one. But it's true, as you say, it's your financial wellness. It's your mental wellness, your physical, your environment, your family, your friends. There are so many aspects of it, as opposed to the hot cup of tea or the bubbly bath.
It is. And the thing is that I'm afraid that the hot cup of tea, which I do enjoy, and then like a nice fuzzy blanket is being used as a Band-Aid, right? Because what is really going on? This is the only time that you have for yourself. Your day is so crazy, it's so stressful that instead of, scrolling on your phone, you're going to drink your cup of tea and you be in your fuzzy blanket, which is wonderful. But really, you need to address your professional wellness. Like, what is going on there? Because, okay, life is going to have stressors. That's part of living, okay? We can deal with that. But it's a type of stressors and the amount of time. Are you in an environment that you're being respected? Are you in an environment that's toxic? Like, a cup of tea is not going to make you feel better. You have to address that. And sometimes it's hard for us to address that. Necessarily implies that our life is going to have to change. And I think that is something that people don't want to admit, which is, they move abroad and they're like, what, my life has changed? And you're like, yeah. You're like, what do you mean? There's no Tesco, there's no Target. No, we live in Spain. Your life is going to change. So it's something that I'm actually exploring more. Another one of my projects that I'm doing this year, I'm writing a book, and it is really addressing living abroad from a holistic wellness space. And it's really thinking about living abroad as a pathway to wellness, but also longevity. And I think that a lot of times we hear about longevity, it's usually heard on a lot of like men bro podcasts. They're talking about peak performance and running ultra marathons and longevity, which, I listen to some of those podcasts because I do like wellness and fitness from some of those kind of viewpoints. Great thing about being a woman is that we think about longevity from a place of wholeness and completeness, not just physical and do it. We think about it in all aspects of our life. I think that's just how we operate. And so I'm really exploring living abroad as a pathway to longevity. So financial longevity, professional longevity, right? Because maybe you don't need to retire if you live abroad. If you're doing something completely different, or if you're experiencing your profession in a different way because you live abroad, maybe you don't need to retire. Maybe you won't burn out. Maybe you have different chapters and different types of like renaissance moments in your professional life. Physically, right? Longevity, eating well, maybe being more physical and having more movement. Mental wellness too. So mental longevity, staying sharp. It's something that I've had a lot of hunches about, and I've done a lot of interviews. I've interviewed maybe over 100 women, and these kind of markers keep on coming up. And something that, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, even though I'm going to try to tap into some research. I don't know, maybe it'll be like a first edition, then I'll do a second edition. Maybe I'll be able to actually put on like some type of research study, but it's something that I just have a hunch about moving abroad intentionally, and especially for thinking about longevity. What does that really look like for us? It can open up a whole different way of being. And I'm excited. And so hopefully I'll finish that book this year and get it out. So, yeah.
I think one of the other things that you really take stock of when you move abroad is looking at your values. Because when you're living in your home country or another country, you know how everything works. When you come into another country, it's like, yeah, okay, I can't go to the supermarket on a Sunday because they're all closed. Okay, my value is I value a fridge full of healthy food. Supermarkets are closed on a Sunday. Therefore, one of my priorities, Saturday, make sure I've got stuff in so I've got healthy food on the Sunday. The supermarkets are closed. Okay, it's very important to me that my fridge is full of fresh vegetables. I've got to get myself organised. So all of a sudden, a value comes up. I'm not going to start eating rubbish food just because the supermarkets are closed on a Sunday. I've got to adjust.
Yeah.
And it can really highlight what your values are. And you talking about longevity here, we are living in the Mediterranean. It always comes out number one in every diet study and diet in respect of what you should eat. I'm not talking about dieting to lose weight. The healthy Mediterranean food, the fruits, the salads, the water we drink, and the occasional glass of red wine. I think moving to another country does highlight your values. What's important to you? Is it you like the arts and culture? Okay, let's see what's going on. The country you're going to, do they have an all year round programme of arts and culture? If it all closes in the winter, are you going to be feeling that you are being nourished if there isn't your love of art and culture? So I think bringing up your values is very, very important.
I agree with you. It's something that, especially when you say arts and culture, I didn't recognize how differently other countries value arts and culture. Specifically here in Spain, just the Spanish believe that arts and culture are not highbrow. It's for everyone to experience. And you see it on so many different levels of the programming, for children, for the public, that's just free and that's just happening, that people are just invited to. It's not seen as highbrow. It's not seen as like elitist. It's here for everyone. And they want to showcase that, whether it be, some of their greats, artists, or local artists or children artists. It's just abundant and everywhere. And there's always so much programming. Something I noticed so much, especially when I lived in Barcelona, there's always something happening. Even in the smaller towns up the coast, you could go on the weekend and there's always going to be, you'd be there for the beach, there's always some kind of arts program happening. There's always some cultural program happening. Even in the summertime, which is maybe not August, but other parts of summer. It's just incredible. And you see that it's not lip service. It's just a way of life, right? Similar to I think how the Spanish view wine. They're like, wine is wine. It's not upper crust. It's not highbrow. It's part of our agriculture. It's part of the common man. This is what we do. This is part of celebration. This is part of life. And that changes how you view things. For me, I still have friends who are like, oh, send me a nice bottle of wine. And I'm like, I live in Spain. I also used to live in La Rioja, which I was like, I could go to any bodega, any place, and just be like, this is excellent wine. It was literally, harvested here in this region. So it's excellent. And I think that has been so interesting to see kind of the prejudices we put on or the beliefs we have about things. And living abroad has just opened up my mind so much. I deserve a good glass of wine, and it shouldn't cost an arm and a leg.
Absolutely, I agree with you there. Christine, before we finish, what questions should I have asked you about Flourish in the Foreign?
The question you should have asked me about Flourish and the Foreign, we covered a lot. Perhaps you should have asked me about wellness, how my definition and practice of wellness has evolved as I've lived abroad. Because that's a question I ask all of my guests. So maybe that's the only one.
Okay, and what's your answer to that?
Well, this is actually excellent because when I was living in Atlanta, I had so much anxiety. Again, I had like no words for it. It's so interesting, very highly educated young woman, no words for like emotions, no words for it. Just like, I don't feel good. I would get up at 4 a.m. and I'd be at the gym at 5 a.m. and I'd work out for an hour and a half, come home, have my smoothie, have all my meal preps, sometimes take a short nap if I was really tired because I got up at 4 a.m., but would be working at 8 a.m. on various, projects and my work. And I was like really strict with it. And sometimes I'd do 2-a-days, and sometimes I would intermittent fast and stop eating at 2 p.m. All of these things, I thought like that was wellness. I moved to La Rioja in 2017. The gym doesn't open till 7. And I was like, what kind of gym is this? You don't open till 7 a.m. Like, duh. And, I have a lifestyle because I was on sabbatical. So I was teaching for only 12 hours a week. And so you would think, oh my gosh, you have all this time. It's so lovely. And I didn't know what to do with myself. Absolutely. I had all this time. I'm living in wine country, having these like nice lushy lunches just turn into dinners. It's amazing. And I'm just like anxious still. I'm like, oh my gosh, I should be doing this. I should be doing that. Like all my friends are doctors and lawyers and, doing things. So I was like, I should be. And for the first, I would say like 3-4 months, just struggled a lot because I was out of my routine and my schedule. And all the things I was trying to clutch onto as like an anchor just wasn't available to me. And so I recognized that, one, for my wellness to even be a thing here in Spain, I had to recognize that, my life had to change. And also that living in La Rioja, moving to Spain, was not going to fix me. I had to be an active participant. And I had to recognize that I'm unwell, because you're living in La Rioja and you're miserable only because you don't have enough to do. You feel like you're not doing enough. And so I had to really examine that and find wellness for me. For me, how my wellness has evolved was seeing a therapist, which has been lovely. because she's like the perfect balance of science and also like kind of like ethereal woo-woo, which I like. A lot of like natural, holistic kind of remedies, but also a lot of like, Christine, why can't you take a break? Like, what's wrong with you? And being like, okay, I'm going to journal that. But also I think in a bigger way, my wellness has changed because I've actually been in intimate contact with it. Before I think it was about me checking something off the box and just doing it and like, oh yes, I'm fit and stuff like that. Now I feel like I'm a friend with my wellness. My wellness is part of my friendship circle. It's part of the thing that nurtures me. My wellness is taking naps. I take 2 naps a day, which is like interesting because 5 years ago, I felt like, what? You don't have time to take a nap. What are you talking about? I take 2 naps a day. I'm social in a more meaningful way. Not about networking all the time. I just go and enjoy, and I'm really present. That's been really part of my wellness too. But also, I think this is part of living in Spain. I've just learned or gained a sense of humor about my life that I didn't have before. I took myself entirely too seriously. Living abroad will make you not take yourself seriously, or you'll get your feelings hurt a lot. And I've decided just to laugh at myself while other people are laughing at me as well, right? With language, with, expectations of things being open, even though you're like, it's not Sunday, it's not a festival, it's not August, it's not all these things, you're still closed. Having to have that kind of levity in my life has transformed me, because now I don't take nearly most things seriously anymore. And that has changed me more than getting up at 4 a.m. and going to the gym and all these things. It's just the lightness, the laughter, constantly being bemused by myself and being like, you thought that was going to work? Why would you think that? You live in Spain. No, it's not going to work like that. That's brought a lot of lightness to my life, but also it's brought a lot of play as well. So I laugh at myself, but also I'm willing to try a lot of things because, hey, I moved to Spain. I've lived here for 5 years and, things are still going pretty great. So you might as well try something else because why not? So yeah, that's how my wellness has evolved. Less crazy military style, more play.
It sounds to me that living abroad, particularly in Spain, has given you the nourishment on so many levels that you were obviously looking for. You were living your life by a checklist. I must be doing this, I must be doing that. You came here and it probably became apparent quite early, you can't do that here. And because of your personality, you are an A-type, you have now found the things that nourish you on many, many levels, and you're at peace.
Yeah, I think that's right. I had to go out and search for it. I had to figure it out. Like we said before, you have to figure out your values. And you have to go out and try to cultivate those things. You can't Amazon Prime friends or community or things like that are going to make you feel nourished. You have to go out there and find it and participate in it. And that has made all the difference. But it is an ongoing thing. It is ongoing. It's like taking a vitamin every day. You have to go out and cultivate that life that means so much to you, that makes you feel great.
I mean, you are going to evolve over time living here. You may move to another city, you may go to another country. But your experiences, and with Flourish in the Foreign, you are paying it forward to all those other women who are telling their stories, who are going to be using your workbooks and courses to start planning their transition. That is such a gift that you are giving everybody.
It is. It's humbling. It's humbling and surprising because I went to law school. I was working in startups before all of this, so it's surprising, but it's humbling, and I feel very honored that people want to share their stories with me, that they love the podcast as much as they do, but also that they want to hear what I think about living abroad. It's humbling, and I don't take it lightly at all, because I do feel that in this kind of space, with, especially I think with the pandemic, a lot of people are very interested in moving abroad now. There's a lot of people who I will say maybe mean well, but don't give good advice. It could be really tragic for people. And I really want anyone who listens to the podcast, anyone who, does the workbook or anything like that, I want them to live a life well lived. I deeply, deeply believe that. I don't want them to move to Mexico with a backpack and $5 just because someone said that you could. I'm like, no, don't do that without a visa. You're like, no, don't do that. I want people to live a life well lived, which requires you to slow down and get to know who you are, and then to be committed to that person as you move abroad and move on in your life. And so I take it very seriously because I think that people are being influenced every day. And if I can influence people to get to know themselves, to honor themselves, to commit to themselves, then I feel like that is amazing. And that's what I want anyone to do. I want people to experience the joys of living abroad and the transformational powers of living abroad. But I want them to do it for themselves. I want them to do it in a deep alignment and deep resonance with themselves. I don't want them to go to Portugal because everyone's going to Portugal. I don't want them to go to, Panama or wherever. I want them to really know themselves and to go to a place that's going to help nourish them for this chapter of their life.
Christine, this has been a brilliant conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Really, really good. And I wish you luck with Flourish and the Foreign and all your various products you've got going. And I hope that you continue to flourish in a wonderful city of Valencia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. And yes, I do continue to keep on flourishing in the foreign here in beautiful Valencia.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe on whatever platform you are using. It is free. And if you would like to tell your story, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story.